I recently did a video on the sound difference between different setups of a condenser microphone, and I received complaints about missing visualization of the noise in terms of power spectra and about the explanation of the methodology, so I thought I'd clear this up with this video, which I hope has a higher scientific standard. In the last video, I showed this test track which I used to compare the different setups. This time, I will only focus on the first two parts of the track, the sine wave for scaling and the silent part. As I mentioned in the last video, the sine wave was used as a reference to scale all recordings to the same volume level, so that the noise level can be compared at equal signal strength. Now I will show how exactly this was done. Basically, what we want is to have the same signal strength for all tracks. However, as can be seen on the lower track, the noise can overlay the signal and thus make the adjustments unprecise. This is why it is useful to denoise the signal before scaling. This is usually done by taking a region of pure noise, such as our silence, and then determining the spectrum. Then, that spectrum is subtracted from the rest of the track and the signals are more isolated. In our case though, we can actually denoise our signal better than the standard software, because we know our signal is exactly 440 Hz. This means we can just assume that all the frequencies in the region of the red arrow are noise, which means we can remove them and then get our noise-reduced signal by an inverse Fourier transform. But even without perfect denoising, the scaling should work fine, as the signal-to-noise ratio is actually rather high. This can be seen more intuitively in the linear version of the same spectrum shown below. There are several methods to determine the scaling factor. For this video, I integrated the entire signals of both reference and signal, and then calculated the ratio from that. The result looks something like this. Now remember, this is the non-denoised signal again. I only denoise for the scaling, but not for the analysis. So let's analyze the noise in the silent part, right after the signal for scaling. The spectrum looks like this. As was already visible by eye and mentioned in my last video, there is a large, low-frequency part in the non-phantom power noise. However, as the human ear can only process frequencies of about 20 Hz and above, I will not consider these when I talk about the noise. It is, however, possible that these low-frequency components are noticeable by the human ear as volume distortions or variations. Now, if we take a look at the spectra of the different recordings, some things become clear immediately. Even above the 20 Hz mark, the noise is generally greater for the non-phantom power recordings. Strongly so for up to about 200 Hz. Again, we have to remember that there's a logarithmic scale here. The noise in this region is nearly an order of magnitude higher without phantom power. For higher frequencies, this stronger noise without phantom power is still present, but considerably weaker. Only for very high frequencies, above 16 kHz, does the phantom power exhibit another peak. This peak made me wonder if the phantom power setup really picked up some noise at high frequencies, or if this was an actual signal present during the recordings. For example, a high-pitched buzz from the speakers or the computer. To get a better idea of the ability to pick up certain frequencies, I thus created a new track to record. This one consists of a chirp going from 20 Hz to 20 kHz in a linear manner. In theory, by measuring the intensity of the recorded signal, it is possible to get a complete transfer function of the microphone. This assumes, however, that the perfect audio source is used, and that is not given by my setup, as the speaker is more of a bottleneck than the mic itself, which means we would actually record the quality of the speaker more than the quality of the microphone. But as the speaker is always equally bad, it is possible to perform a relative comparison between different setups of the microphone, in other words, with phantom power or without. Now, looking at the spectrum shows us that the different setups have a more or less identical frequency response. It also shows a peak at high frequencies for the non-smooth spectrum, but for all of the recordings and not only for phantom power. So that means that there is not really a signal lost without phantom power at high frequencies. So what have we learned from all this? For me, one thing in particular, apparently, if the microphone is used without phantom power, boosting the signal at the sound card level is a good idea. in all of the experiments I did, digitally increasing the signal later on was always inferior to boosting it beforehand. And since I don't know exactly how the amplification by the sound card works, it's hard to say why this is, but the result is quite clear in my opinion. The second thing I realized even more during this video than the last one is that there's only a little difference between phantom power setup and that without. Aside from the low frequency volume variations, the noise was only slightly worse, and the transfer function of the frequency seems to be nearly identical. So all in all, the simple onboard sound card did an impressive job, at least compared to my other equipment. And thank you for making it to the end of the video. I hope I could make things clear, and goodbye.